Our next artwork is the temple of Amun-Re. Remember I told you Amun and Re came together to create this extremely new and more powerful, preferred, popular sun god called Amun-Re. And not only was he popular with the people, but he was popular with the kings. And so to show their support of Amun-Re, the kings, would build onto his temple at Karnak. Where's Karnak again, Miss Cortez? It's right here. Thebes was the new capital. Karnak across the way where Amun-Re's temple was. Oh, and by the way, when Hatshepsut died, well, they moved the capital back to Thebes. They were like, she's dead, move that capital back. We want it in Thebes across from Karnak. So they did. We're not going to look at all of the sites at Karnak because it's massive. The construction, as you can see, I don't know why there's a hyphen there, but the construction was over a 200-year period, meaning that for 200 years, kings and queens would add on to this site. Oh, thank you for that successful battle. Here, I'm going to give you another piece of a temple. Oh, thank you for this miraculous birth of my son. So I'm going to add on to your temple at Karnak. So what we have is this building upon over acres of land to create the temple of Karnak, the temple of Amun-Re at Karnak. As I said, this whole complex was dedicated to the sun god, and it was built on by many pharaohs. We're not going to look at all of them. Instead, we're going to look at the central sanctuary. Here is a reconstruction. Now, oftentimes, or most times in sacred spaces, there will be these man-made lakes or ponds or pools. This is not for you to do a quick dip. No, this is river water that is symbolic of life or eternity, right? So this artificial life, artificial lake symbolizes life and creation. And they dot all over sacred spaces. So here we have two causeways or two passages into the central temple to Karnak. Each gateway, here's a gate, here's a gate, here's a gate, here's a gate. Each gateway marks something more sacred than the one previous. As you advance through these gates, you are getting closer to the innermost sanctuary of the god. Each gate is like a marker, and each gate is only allowed to be passed by those of very specific and highly trained individuals. Just like what we saw with the ziggurats and the temples in ancient Near East, you're not allowed in the temple. You're not allowed into these temples. You're not a trained professional. And so the gates are markers of those levels that you can advance into to get closer to the temple. And each of the walls and each of the gates has some kind of proclamation, either of the king who dedicated this gate or this wall, or the god himself, Amun-Re. So we see the religion and the history and politics of ancient Egypt surrounding you. And if you're so fortunate, you would advance forward and forward and forward. We're now going to look specifically at the sacred site where Amun-Re's spirit, the god, was believed to be able to come down and inhabit. Priests who were caring for the god of Amun-Re, just like what we saw in the behaviors in ancient Near East, the priests and priestess to these gods and goddesses would provide food every day. They would have some type of statue of that god, some physical manifestation that then would be treated, dressed, bathed, given beautiful smelling oils, and it's just fantastic. So let's go into this innermost sanctuary. Here we are. This is a model reconstruction. We will look at what remains of it, but I like this because it helps you understand the construction of it and also the scale. Do you see this little guy down here? That's to give you a sense of scale. What? I know, it's massive. It's massive. The columns that hold up this room are all carved and painted with scenes of holy prayers, incantations, dedications to Amun-Re. And I also want to introduce you to a vocabulary term, because this type of room is referred to as a hypostyle hall. Hypostyle hall, a hall with a roof that is supported by many columns. It's a Greek word. Even though this is ancient Egyptian, the Greeks, they like to name everything with their own terms, and we use it. It's Greek for literally under columns. Hypo means under. Style is column. I love words. Hypo means under or beneath or below. Like if you're hypoglycemic, means you have low blood sugar. I know. Okay. Hypo. Hypo is Greek for under. And column is style. So hypostyle hall means a hall that has columns underneath it. The whole structure is being held up by these columns. Here, look at that. So the structure itself was arranged using two different heights of columns. There were lower columns that had the tops painted to look like lotus buds. Lotuses are beautiful flowers that grow out of the thick black mud in the Nile. And then also papyrus. And the papyrus frond tops were these fluffy tops, and they were the taller columns. Now, it's not a mistake here. The papyrus columns were taller than the bud columns. That's not because they messed up or they ran out of material. It is specifically to provide a gap for a clerestory. A clerestory, which, do I have the vocab term for clerestory? I don't know why. It's such an important element. I should. Write it down, clerestory. You might hear people refer to it as a clear story. That's okay. Clerestory literally is a level or story that light can pass through. Clear story, clerestory. Here, these slotted lines are the windows, and it would let in light and air into this enclosed space, which is important to the clerestories. Clerestories right there. It's important because this is a temple dedicated to a god of the sun. And if we have all these columns and a roof over it, it's going to get crazy dark in here. So how do you let in the sun's light into his temple? Well, you raise up the central columns to create a gap in the roof line for a clerestory. What? I know, it's so cool, right? So we have our lower columns, we have our upper columns or taller columns that allow for the light of the sun, Amun-Re, to come into his innermost sanctuary. Write down clerestory because we're going to see it again. Write down hypostyle hall. It is a vocabulary term. Here are what remains of the temple at Karnak. Most of the columns stand. The paint has washed away over millennia, and the lower registers of the carvings have been defaced. Because again, after these are no longer worshipped, then you take away somebody's power by taking away their face or their imagery. I put this here just to remind you again that they were brightly painted. Ah, there's a clerestory. There's a clerestory window right there. So here we are under the papyrus columns, and there are the shorter lotus columns. it's important that you remember we're not allowed into this space, right? This is for the priest and priestess serving the god Amun-Re. And for them, this would have been a sacred experience. Imagine holding your torch into this dark area that is filtered with sunlight from the clerestory and looking up. You, who have been trained to read the priestly writings of hieroglyphs, can read the incantations and prayers and blessings of the god all around you. And that torchlight is vibrating through these columns as you pass through this hallowed sacred space. Here's a detail of some of those column capitals. Isn't it beautiful? Beautiful.